Dole and I tied for second in delegates. Senator Dole should be here tonight if he wants to be the Republican nominee for president. Arizona is an important state, and this is an idea contest, and our nominee can't win on negative ads, endorsements, and ducking idea contests like tonight. But that gives me a chance to say to my friend for 30 years, Pat Buchanan, Pat, I'm not going to let you hijack our party. I'm going to debate with you on the ideas. Buchananism is wrong for our country. It's wrong for our party. We need a rising, shining America, not a divided, pessimistic America as we go into the next century.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Time's up. Mr. Buchanan, your opening statement, please.
Sure. Lamar, welcome to Crossfire. But Lamar did make a very good point. And frankly, Bob Dole made a very good point when he said this is a battle and a struggle for the heart and soul of our party, and indeed it is. You know, Woodrow Wilson said in 1912 that a great political party is truly serving the nation only when it becomes the instrument of some great and good cause. Let me try to outline to you the cause I believe in the post-Cold War era my party should represent. It is a cause of what I call a new conservatism of the heart. That is not a conservatism of the boardroom or the business roundtable. It is a bold and unapologetic conservatism that speaks up for those who have no voice, that speaks up for the right to life of the innocent unborn in this country. And that speaks up for those working men and women in this country betrayed by trade deals, sold out for the benefit of big corporations. We're going to speak up for them, my friends. We need to speak up, really, as leaders in the Republican Party for those who have no voice, and I want to bring them all home to this Republican Party, and I'm asking the GOP, please keep the door open. I'll bring these good people home. Thank you very much.
Mr. Dornan, your opening statement, please.
What a great day on the road to the White House in Arizona. George Washington's birthday. Can you imagine the father of our country coming back here and being confronted with negative advertising? Worse than that, far worse. Can you imagine this man, this towering figure of character, looking at the moral crisis in the White House and wondering what has happened to our country? Now, I'm wearing a Clinton countdown watch. It's not a backward watch. It only goes forward. And it says, my colleagues, 333 days to the inauguration. I've ordered 7 more to send to my colleagues in this House so they will keep it clearly before them that the target is Clinton, not one another. And with eyewitnesses and character references in the audience, I would tell the 2 outsiders and my friend who says we have to take back America, we own the House and the Senate, Pat, and there's J.D. Hayworth and John Shadegg, and they don't get any better. We're the rest. You don't get any better than the Arizona delegation to the Congress. We're winning. All we need is the White House.
Thank you, Mr. Dornan. Mr. Forbes, your opening statement, please.
Thank you very much. The principal question of this campaign is how do we get America moving again? How do we restore hope, growth, and opportunity to our country? How do we create more jobs and better paying jobs? The American people today are frustrated. They don't understand why 2 incomes in a family can't seem to do the job that 1 income could in previous generations. They don't understand why so many young people believe that they won't have the chance to get ahead the way their parents and grandparents did. They don't understand what's happened to the quality of life in America in the last 30 years, why it seems to have been under assault in our culture, in our streets, in our schools, and for our families. The problem with America today is an overpowering, overweening, arrogant government. Your personal freedoms are slowly slipping away into the iron grip of government. Breaking that iron grip is the principal task of my campaign. Break that grip, and America's best days are ahead. Break that grip, and America quickly will experience the most extraordinary economic boom and spiritual renewal in our history. All of the proposals that I have in this campaign are designed to return opportunity, control, responsibility back to we the people. In the hands of we the people, America will move ahead and quickly astound ourselves and the world with our achievements and opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, candidates, for your opening statements. We'll now move to the first half of the program, a reasonably unstructured question and answer period of the candidates. I would ask that you attempt to avoid filibusters, and I'll try to be as fair as I can in balancing off the time. Mr. Alexander, on my way here to the debate this evening, I heard your comments at the airport chastising Mr. Dole for not showing up, but also saying that you were here in part to fight Buchananism. What is Buchananism in your opinion?
Well, here's what Buchananism is, and let me contrast it with my own views while my friend Pat is here so he can speak for himself on it. Buchananism says to create jobs, we build a wall around the country. I say the way we create jobs is lower taxes, lower regulations, and focus on education. Pat said, let's end. Pat opposed the Gulf War. I say we have responsibilities in the world. Pat would put tariffs on our trading partners. That put taxes on us. It takes money out of our pockets. I come from a real-world background as the governor of Tennessee, as a university president, someone who's actually created a company that today has 2,800 employees. In Tennessee, when I began, we were one of the poorest states. We joined the world, we recruited international investment, we got busy selling our soybeans and our cotton and our Jack Daniels and our country music, and now our Saturn cars all around the world. That's the way to create a rising, shining America, not to build a wall around the country, put on tariffs, and have a future based upon protectionism. Arizona knows that.
I think I've got the drift. Mr. Buchanan, what do you say to that?
I would say to the former Secretary of Education, you need a little education, Lamar. Now, let me talk to you. Let me tell you what Buchanan's ideas mean. Basically, I propose the lowest tax rates on savings, investment, and income of any nation in the Western industrial world because we want money to come into the United States, not go out. Now let's talk about the trade policy. Let's talk about the trade policy. In dealing with communist China, dealing with England is one thing. Free and fair trade, a free trade deal. Same with Canada. Let's talk about communist China. Mainland China imposes 40% tariffs on American goods. It steals our intellectual property at will. It fires missiles at our friends. It tells us who we may and may not let enter this country. And it sells us 5 times as much as it buys from us. I would sit down to the Communist Chinese and say, Mr. Deng Xiaoping, this might be a good deal for you, but it's not for me. And let me tell you, you are going to open your markets to American goods, or you're not going to get unrestricted access to our goods. If you're a tough man... And besides that, we don't like the way you treat dissidents and the way you treat women, so we're not treating you the same way we treat a democratic republic because you are a brutal dictatorship, and we will deal with you toughly. And we got too many weak sisters in Washington, Lamar, who don't understand that.
Well,
Why don't we go right back? I mean, Mr. Buchanan would put a 20% tax.
Let me pick up Mr. Dornan here. Mr. Dornan, I want to go back to a theme you raised in your opening statement.
Yes, sir.
Is this battle for the heart and soul of the Republican Party a good thing for the Republican Party? There's been a tremendous amount of rhetoric since the New Hampshire primary, and it seems to be incredibly divisive.
If we stay on issues, if we stay on ideas, if we stay out of Dick Gephardt and Bill Clinton's vocabulary, throwing the word extremist at one another, tearing one another apart. I was the replacement for Pat Buchanan on Crossfire when he went off to the hero of this party in this auditorium, Ronald Reagan, to work with him. We've all guested on Crossfire when Pat's been there. What are we going to do if Rush Limbaugh decides to run for office? Tear him up? Tear him apart? After these freshmen made him an honorary member of the freshman class? Don't tear up our warriors. Pat and I disagreed over the Gulf War. We disagreed over how good an ally Israel is. But don't attack one another when we're all one team trying to get the corruption out of the White House.
Mr. Forbes. Okay. Again, let me remind the audience that we want to get as much time with the candidates as we possibly can. Mr. Forbes.
He's not going to run for office. He's making $25 million a year, and I'm not, Lamar, so don't cut my salary.
Mr. Forbes, I don't think Arizonans know a whole lot about where you stand on some of these fair trade, free trade issues. How do you see these issues?
Well, America is the most competitive nation in the world today. On a level playing field, we can take on anyone. The principal task for America is not to build fences, not to build walls, not to raise taxes, which is another word for tariffs, not to do that, but to reduce trade barriers. Do that, and America will prosper even more. I believe in free trade. I believe we can do more to reduce barriers. It takes tough negotiating, but it also takes vision to enter trade negotiations to have a real free trade agreement. The problem with something like NAFTA wasn't the desire to have a level playing field. We can do very well. The problem with something like NAFTA was the fact that our Clinton administration and the Mexican government neither have lived up to the spirit of NAFTA. A little over a year ago, they enacted a major devaluation of the peso. Incredibly, our government encouraged them to do that. That devaluation had only one goal, and that is to make it hard for American products to enter Mexico and easy for Mexican products to enter the United States. That was wrong. I oppose that bailout. As president, we'll correct that.
Mr. Forbes, thanks. Mr. Alexander, I think many Americans share the fear that their leaders, stated simply, don't have the guts to stand up to other foreign leaders and say, open your markets to us. That the problem is not free trade or fair trade, but that we don't insist on the right kinds of
well, that's
accession.
part of that.
I'll
was
go to Mr. Alexander
so
first.
I'll be glad to take it. Look among those of us who have a chance to be president, make a judgment about who has the executive sort of background to do that. The last Republican governor who had a chance to be president was a fellow named Reagan from a nearby state here. Secretary Shultz told me that the most important executive foreign policy decision Ronald Reagan made in his early years was when he fired the air traffic controllers, because that said to Gaddafi and to people around the world that here is an executive who can make a decision. Unlike the others, we have a distinguished Washington columnist, a distinguished congressman, and a magazine publisher. I've been a chief executive. I'm a governor. I fought for a year and a half with a teachers union to pay teachers more for teaching well in our state. We're the only state to do that. I found out that an executive who throws everything he's got into something important for as long as he is there can wear everybody else out. So I would say to the Japanese, now that we're ready to sell Saturns made in Tennessee in Tokyo, Mr. Hashimoto, we expect the Saturns made in our country to have the same chance to be sold in your country that the Toyotas do in our country, but we need free trade, and we don't need Buchananism and 20% tariffs on our trading partners.
Mr. Buchanan.
First, I would like to thank Braveheart, my friend Dornan here, for his coming to my defense against the charge of extremism. Second, let me say with regard to Japan, look, I've been arguing this case year in and year out. In the last 25 years, Japan has sold us 40 million cars, and we've been able to sell them 400,000. Now, that has gone on and on and on. And let me tell you something, Lamar. This morning, Mr. Hashimoto is a lot more concerned that Pat Buchanan's going to be sitting in that Oval Office than that you're going to be sitting there.
Mr. Buchanan, if they are...
I'll tell you what I will do. Here's what I will do. Let me finish my thought. Now, I will say to the Japanese that your economy is roughly comparable to ours in regulation and pay scale. So a free and fair trade deal with you is in the cards, but you are not going to run a $65 billion trade surplus at our expense year in, year out, year in, year out. That's exporting over 1 million jobs. I'll tell you what I will do. I'll tell Mr. Hashimoto, you and I are going to work out this problem, or I am going to work it out unilaterally, and we're going to be in your market, or you are not getting the same access to our market we've given you since World War II when we defended you.
Mr. Buchanan, quick follow-up with Mr. Buchanan. Mr. Buchanan, if they are cheap, good cars that the American consumer likes, that encourages Detroit to make more competitive products, what's wrong with that?
You got a good idea here. Look. Imports serve a certain good, excellent function. But what we don't look, Ronald Reagan told the Japanese, you're going to kill Detroit. You've got 1.6 million cars in our market. Thus far, no further. He stopped them cold. What has happened there, listen, friends, just listen. Textiles, 2/3 of them are gone. Shoes are completely gone. Radios are gone. TVs are gone. VCRs are gone. 1/5 of our steel industry is gone. Right. We're losing one industry after another. I'm just asking you, friends, wake up and smell the coffee if we're going to be the greatest nation on earth in the 21st century as well as the 20th.
Mr. Dornan, let me stay with that. Doesn't free trade help the American consumer?
Of course. Here's the difference. Boy, this is great, J.D., right in the middle here saying, he's right, and he's right. Pat, get off Japan, join me on communist Vietnam, major human rights violator. You're absolutely on target with China. In my district, in Disneyland, everything from the expensive bisque to the little refrigerator magnets are all made by children and women who are virtual serfs in an ugly communist regime 5 times larger than the United States. Join me, all of you join me where the rubber meets the road in the Congress and the Senate in holding the sanctions on Castro, a first-degree murderer. Join me with containing the North Korea and the other terrorist states, Iran, Iraq, and Libya, where Farrakhan has just taken his numerology tour.
Mr. Dornan, could I get you back to the point,
right.
though?
The point is, free trade, here it is, here's a punchline, free trade with free people. It's that simple.
So this is... Mr. Forbes, I have no question for you. Just pick it up.
Good. Let's
talk China.
Let's remember a simple thing. When you put politicians in charge of trade, the American people lose. We do have tariffs today. Tariffs are another form of taxes. When tariffs are applied, political muscle counts, not equity. America becomes less competitive when tariffs are there. Tariffs gave us the Great Depression, helped lead to the Second World War. The American people, when they earn money, should have the right to buy the products they wish from wherever in the world. This is freedom. This is freedom. I don't see government as the solution. I see it as part of the problem. When we remove certain barriers here at home, like a garbage tax code that is corrupt and a dead weight on the American people and small businesses, when we have When we have too high interest rates, when we have excessive regulation, this is what's holding us at home. Free us up at home, take the shackles off of our legs, and we can compete with anyone in the world, regardless of how they try to keep us back. We don't need to fear the world.
Hold it, Mr. Buchanan, hold it. Mr. Buchanan.
Steve, in my younger days, I used to adhere to that philosophy. Now,
let me tell you what's wrong, Pat. You peaked early.
Let me talk, Steve. Steve, let's address this point, though. Look, when you have a situation,
Mr. Buchanan, please.
Oh, okay.
I want to shift to another subject, but the question goes to you.
All right.
You're running radio ads this week that say 6 months after you become president,
right,
you'll build a security fence along the entire Mexican border.
No.
And if necessary, you will man it with troops. Do you have any idea how much that would cost?
Yeah, I do. Let me tell you. If you listen clearly, it's costed out. Let me talk about that. I want to address, and I know it's controversial, and I know it's an issue people don't like to touch. But the fact of the matter is the Constitution of the United States obligates, it doesn't ask, it obligates the President and Congress to defend the states of the American Union from foreign invasion. And when you have 1, 2, 3 million people walking across your border every year, breaking your laws, you have an invasion.
Please.
The immigration laws are being violated, and I will do this. They're being violated out where Bob Dornan is, down there. 1,000, 2,000, 3,000 walking across every weekend, most coming for work, some coming for crime, some coming for welfare. I have said this. Within 6 months, I will stop the illegal immigration from the southern border of this country cold. I will do it with a security fence.
Mr. Alexander, what's your position on Mr. Buchanan's proposal?
Well, I think we need to be specific about what Pat Buchanan is saying. I mean, in the earlier discussion, let's not gloss over it. He puts a 20% tariff, which is a tax on us, on our principal trading partners. This is a state, Arizona, 20% you said in Japan.
10 on Japan,
you
20
didn't
on
say
China.
it tonight, but you said it before, and you also object to trading with Mexico, and which is the biggest market of Arizona. Now let's go to the border. Let's be specific about this. You want to build 2 walls around the country, one for trade and one for immigration. Of course, we should control illegal immigration. We should turn the management of it over to the armed services so that they can do the correct job working with the Border Patrol and others, not to have armed service people making arrests on the border, but to solve the problem. The reason we should do that is because our failure to deal with illegal immigration is poisoning our attitude toward legal immigration. And Pat, you don't make a difference between people who are legally here and people who are illegally here. People legally here who are paying taxes have a right to be treated with respect, and you want to stop that sort of immigration.
Mr. Dornan,
yes.
Please.
I wish Mr. Taylor was here. He always says, the talk is good, but somebody's got to walk the walk. Now, as a chairman of 2 committees in our great Congress, one of them an intelligence subcommittee that has to deal with terrorism and terrorists coming across the border, but the other military personnel who has to respond to Lamar's idea of La Marines, a whole 5th service on the border. He's never heard of the Coast Guard and the Border Guards. I am having hearings on March 15th in Southern California, and tomorrow the California Guard flies me by helicopter down to the border, where I will walk the walk and analyze this problem, because all the bills will come through this chairman.
Mr. Dornan,
yes.
Does California want a security fence along the Mexico border?
We need fences, and Duncan Hunter is the lead on this, the California along the border, at certain points, but we can't build a Great Wall of China. I know Pat was kidding, but he says, I know. He says he has scouts checking out the Great Wall now. We don't have slave labor. But let me just close on this. Let me close on this.
But does California want it?
What? No, I don't want to give Pat a free ride.
Mike, don't exaggerate. Look, what I say is there's about 66 to 200 miles where security fence in the areas where they come across in great numbers. That'll do it with the Border Patrol. That's all you need.
Does California want it down in San Diego?
At the soccer field where they come across at night 20-1 against our underpaid and undermanned border guards. But let me not let Pat off.
Hold it. Do they?
Wait.
Do they?
One thought.
Yes.
Do they want
One thought. Where Pat and I disagree on immigration is, I love legal immigration. I love on the 4th of July. Always shed a tear to see people from all over the world come here legally. If we stop legal immigration, the only thing left will be illegal immigration.
Right.
That's what we have to
Mr.
stop.
Forbes, I want to give you an opportunity to respond to this area, and then I want to start with you on a tax question. So, do you have any comments on this area, or
yes,
I will move to tax?
Couple of basic comments. First of all, it's typical of a lifetime politician when a problem arises to suggest that once again we create another agency, another government program. In this case, another branch of the armed services. America is the only nation in the world that doesn't use its military as police because we believe in freedom. And if we have a problem, which we do on our borders, it's very simple. We don't need a new armed services. We don't need to build a lot of fences. What we do need to do is beef up, give the tools to the Border Patrol. That's what they're there for. Let them do the job.
Mr. Ford.
They can do the job. They can do the job. We also need to reform the INS, streamline deportation procedures. Half of the illegals in this country overstay their visas. It shouldn't take 10 years for the bureaucracy to discover that. We can do more. We can do more border patrols with helicopters and high technology that would be far more effective than a fence.
Mr. Ford.
Also, though, legal immigration is good for America. It's a dynamic of America.
Okay, on that, hold it. Mr. Forbes, let me shift to the tax area.
And just let me finally say, on legal immigration, America would not be the high-tech leader if we did not have legal immigration. Just go to those laboratories. 1/4 to 1/2 of those PhDs are foreign-born. They're contributing to America.
Mr. Forbes, polls show that a flat tax is a popular idea in Arizona, but your flat tax, as I understand it, would let a rich guy with about $1 million in investment income pay no tax, while a working wage family, $50,000 to $60,000, would pay taxes. Is that fair?
No, it is not. It's typical of the liberal media, and I'm afraid
Mr. Forbes, I was referring to your concept, not my question.
And also some of my opponents who need a lesson in the flat tax. The flat tax is a tax cut. It removes millions of people from the tax rolls. A family making $36,000 a year, for example, would pay no federal income tax. They now pay $3,000 a year. Under my plan, they're off the tax rolls. Also, there's no tax on your personal savings, no tax on Social Security, no tax on pensions, no tax on your capital gains, no tax on your inheritance. Now, to answer your question, answer this question, all income is taxed. But now I'm going to tell you something, my friends, that they don't want you to know, and that is investment income is taxed, but businesses write the check, not individuals. You don't get a blizzard of 1099 forms. Businesses pay that 17% tax on investment income. And so what do you want? Do you want to give in to the demagogues, have business escape the tax, and have the American people pay the tax? As I've said many times, I've been very blessed in this life. If you don't change the tax code, I'm fine. If you do change it, I'm fine. But there are
It is. Mr. Dornan, it's Mr. Dornan's turn.
Calm down, Bob. Calm
Mr.
down,
Dornan?
Bob.
No.
But there are tens of millions of Americans who are struggling to put nest eggs together for education,
Mr. Forbes.
for housing, for retirement. The flat tax will enable them give them a better chance to put that nest egg together. Income is taxed. I'd rather have business pay the tax, Mike, than individual Americans.
Mr. Dornan, what do you think about not counting as income dividends and interest and things
Mike,
like that?
I just told you it is income. Business pays the tax. Do you
I
understand that?
I understand. I'm talking to Mr. Dornan.
I understand that, and Rush is pushing that point for you every other night. Here's the problem. Here's the problem. What do you get through in that arena where you must walk the walk and vote? And I'm assuming that your mortgages are paid off. My home's in Virginia, where I have to live most of the year because Newt Gingrich never let us go home, right through Christmas to January 3rd, and my home in Garden Grove, California, I need that interest on my home mortgage deductions, and I like to give charity money to Mother Teresa directly and not have it laundered through D.C. So I want that deduction also.
Mr. Dornan, why should government, though, why should government be making a decision that your decision to buy a house is more important, more valuable than someone else's decision to rent a piece of property?
Mr. Moderator, that's a purist position, but let me tell you the most important man on this issue, and it's not who sits in the White House. It's Bill Archer, the chairman of Ways and Means, the man who replaced George Bush in Houston 26 years ago. He convinced me 3 years ago that the flat taxes idea has come and gone. I've been for it for 28 years. Welcome to the flat tax. It's a consumerism tax administered by the states where we shut down the IRS.
But Mr. Buchanan, you've indicated that you support the mortgage interest and the charitable deductions too. Now, isn't that the kind of thing that got us a several thousand-page tax code in the first place?
Look, there's no doubt. Look, let me say first about Steve Forbes. I think he's shown a lot of moxie getting in his campaign. I think he's done a tremendous job in popularizing this idea of a flat tax. Now, all I'm saying is, Steve, in the real world, people have gone out and they have bought their homes. They bought the mortgage, they got the mortgage, they're paying that interest deduction, they budgeted everything for that, they make the charitable contributions to churches, they're very familiar with saying what I gave to the church or what I gave to the museum, that is deductible. And at the same time, I understand the theory of the fact that everything is taxed once, but you cannot get through the Congress of the United States a proposal that says David Rockefeller sits down there in Florida on a veranda and pays no taxes on $100 million in income, and the guy serving him drinks is paying 17%. It's not going to work, Steve.
So
I think if you get,
Buchanan, do you sacrifice?
I am in favor of a flat tax that will get through the Congress of the United States. And when I get to be president, I'm going to get Steve Forbes in there to help me do exactly that.
Mr. Alexander, is that sacrificing principle for political expediency? Just simply what Congress will or will not pass?
The way Pat described it, it is. But here's what I think we should do. I think we should try to do the right thing. Whatever the policy is, it ought to be the right thing to do. And it's the president's job then to try to persuade half the people we're right. I think what Steve has done is take a fairly common sense set of principles upon which most Republicans agree, and taken it to an extreme. Here's what I favor. I believe we need a new tax system to encourage jobs, savings, and investment. I would repeal the 1993 Clinton tax increase. I would repeal the 1990 tax increase. I would rather see us go back to something like what President Reagan proposed when we had too low rates. I would reduce the tax on capital gains to at least 17% and on estates. I would eliminate most deductions, but it's a part of the country's social policy to continue to encourage the home mortgage deduction, the charitable deduction. I would like to see a tax credit up to $500 so that we can give that money directly to the Boys Club or the Girls Club or the charity for battered women rather than send it to Washington. There may be a few other deductions. Jack Kemp approached this in the right way. He created a set of principles upon which we can create a new tax system.
But Jack Kemp's bottom line is a flat tax.
Well, but Jack Kemp did, and this is the difference between someone who's had some experience as a chief executive, a governor, a university president, a cabinet secretary. In the campaign, you create the principles, and then as a chief executive, you develop the plan. And going forward with an idea that Steve, now I don't interrupt you, and don't you interrupt me.
Monstrous tax code today.
Steve, I have not interrupted you, and I'd rather you didn't interrupt me. A chief executive.
Let's say something.
A chief executive's job is to set the agenda. Develop a strategy, and persuade half the people you're right. And a new tax system with fewer deductions and a simpler code, 1 or 2 rates, is the right thing to do and should be the first act of the new Republican president to create job growth, savings, and investment.
Really, seriously. Hold it. Time out. Isn't this a lot more fun than where you have a minute and then 30 seconds
Absolutely.
to reply?
This is the first debate in 13 months.
Mr. Dorney.
Yes, sir.
What did you have to say to me?
Now, here's the thing that amazes me. I've been up to Chippewa Falls in the beautiful northern part of this country and visited Cray Incorporated, the world's largest supercomputers. Why does Phil Gramm get 1 point, half a point under him? Pat's down to 15%, which is kind of shaky. We don't know what it is. Run all the data, good data, not dirty in, dirty out. Run it through a Cray supercomputer, and we'll find out in a nanosecond what the right flat tax is. This silly talk.
But it's supposed to be a flat tax. Mr. Buchanan?
I just want to get back to one point, and because I know there's disagreement with Lamar and others on me and Steve on the trade issue. And let me talk briefly about NAFTA, very briefly. Look, and I want to talk about this point here. It is when Americans' average wage, say, is $15 or $16 or $20 an hour, and you remove all barriers to corporations going to where wages are down to $1 or $2 an hour, you're going to put ungodly pressure under the wages of American workers. And I believe, let me finish seriously. I genuinely believe we've got to concern ourselves with the declining wages of men and women who work with their hands and tools and machines, and people who cannot see that forcing them into competition with folks who make $1 an hour here or 50 cents an hour in Asia is wrong. It is un-American, and we've got to stop doing it to our own people.
Well, I wonder if that means...
Gentlemen, hold it, gentlemen. We've only got a couple of minutes left here.
I wonder if that means Arizona should stop trading with Mexico. I mean, Arizona's
I think we covered that one. I want to move to another one that's very important to Arizonans, and that's Social Security. But I've only got a couple of minutes, so I'm going to ask each one of you 30 seconds on this particular question. Why, Mr. Alexander, should today's worker pay much more than is necessary to fund today's required benefit stream on Social Security?
Because we have a system that should give to older Americans what they're entitled to, is the short answer. What we should do...
It's not required for today's older American.
We have a Social Security system that needs to give to people who count on it what they're entitled to. The new president should take us through a discussion in this country with this result. One, make sure that happens, that people get what they're entitled to. Number 2, begin to look for ways for newer people to use their own money in a different sort of way. And 3, make sure it's solvent. The new president can do that during the first 4 years of his administration.
Look,
Mr. Buchanan, why?
Right, the people, let me tell you why. The people who are now retired are the greatest generation this country ever produced. They brought us through the Depression. They brought us through World War II on defeating fascism on both sides of the world. And they've made their sacrifices to America. They are now budgeting their incomes in places like Arizona and Florida. And they've got it budgeted, Social Security. You cannot cut their income, my friend.
I understand. Could I clarify? Right now, today's worker pays much more than is necessary to make sure that the commitments and promises are honored to that generation.
All right. Now,
why is that fair?
All right. Now let me tell you. What you're saying, if you want to turn Social Security into a flat transfer payment from one generation to the next, that is one thing. It was not originally designed as such. As you know, it was designed as a trust fund. But the key thing now is, look, whatever we do, and there are a lot of ideas, and Lamar's got some good ones, and we got some, but you cannot start cutting the income of people who have budgeted the rest of their life on something that is quite meager. You can't start chopping that. There's other places to chop, like foreign aid. You can cut that out completely.
Mr. Dornan, do you understand the thrust of my question?
Yes. Yes, and Pat paid me the compliment of calling me a braveheart, so I will touch the electric third rail. We should have a whole night on Social Security.
Agreed.
I will not anger the press by bringing out my big picture of our 10th grandchild, Molly O'Dornan, but in the preamble to the Constitution, when it says to secure the blessings of liberty upon ourselves and our posterity, that posterity means children and grandchildren. I've got 5 of the first and 10 of the second, and it's not going to be there for them. So I want people in the Congress and in the Senate to stop doing what we did a few years ago that angered Alan Keyes so much in New Hampshire, where he said it's unconscionable twice. Stop shoveling this problem off to the next Congress or 5 Congresses from now. If we get a Republican in the White House, please God, then we will fix this problem.
Okay. Mr. Forbes, some quick thoughts, please, on Social Security.
Okay, on Social Security, we must keep our commitments and promises to those who are on the system today. We must keep our promises, too, to those who are going to go on the system in the next 15 years, because real-life decisions have been made on the basis of those promises. But we all know, and especially younger Americans know, that the current system is going to be busted broke by the time they retire. So while we still have time, why don't we put in a new system for younger Americans, where a portion of their payroll tax that now goes to Washington to subsidize the national debt would instead go into young people's own individual savings or retirement account.
Okay. Gentlemen, thank you very much. I think it is time now to give some Arizona University students and alumni a chance to answer or question the presidential candidates. We ask the questioners here on stage to state their question to a specific candidate. That candidate will then have 1 minute to answer, and each other candidate will have 30 seconds to reply. So with that, let me turn to Ron Jackson. He is the chairman of College Republicans. He has a question for Mr. Buchanan on trade and exports. Ron?
Mr. Buchanan, given your protectionist economic policies, what will be the economic consequences for the average American family when they purchase the goods and services that are essential to their day-to-day survival? Is the free market not essential to a strong America? And was it not, in fact, the free market that crushed the evil empire, the Soviet Union?
Mr. Buchanan.
No, it was not economics that crushed the Soviet Empire. It was the spirit of human freedom and liberty and the character of the great people. And I'll tell you what else it was. And it was the leadership of Ronald Wilson Reagan, a great president I was honored to serve. Now, let me tell you, just, we've only got a few seconds to answer. There are trade wars going on in the world. I'm not declaring them. We have now a $200 billion merchandise trade deficit every year, which translates into 4 million lost American jobs. We have more Americans working in government than in manufacturing for the first time in our history. Wake up and smell the coffee. This country cannot afford, we cannot afford to export our manufacturing base, which is what we are doing if we're going to be the greatest nation on earth in the 21st century as we were in the 20th.
Time, Mr. Buchanan. Mr. Alexander.
Well, Pat reminded us of Ronald Wilson Reagan, who believed that this country is proud and confident enough to trade in the world and opposed putting walls around our country. Mr. Buchanan would put a 20% tariff on our trading partners. He would cancel NAFTA, which would, in Arizona, which is an export hotspot, send incomes down, weaken our role in the world, having us sell our goods to each other instead of to people around the world, and lower our standard of living. That is not the Republican Party of Ronald Reagan. That is Buchananism, and it's wrong for our country.
Thank you, Mr. Alexander. Mr. Forbes.
Protectionism always fails. It gave us the Great Depression, destroyed tens of millions of jobs. What we have to keep in mind as we face the pressures of today, just remember they designed the welfare system in the name of compassion and destroyed the lives of tens of millions of people. Saying that you're going to protect jobs by government decree is going to end up destroying jobs. Just look at Europe. They have twice the unemployment rate of America. Protectionism doesn't work. Free trade does. The American spirit works. We are competitive. We can be more competitive.
Mr. Dornan.
Wake up and smell the coffee, Juan Valdez, and keep that high Colombian mountain grown coming in. I know, Mr. Chairman, that you watch this chairman on C-SPAN. Most college Republicans do. And I just came through an airport named after one of the great former senior senators of this state, and he said a few years ago, American cars are garbage. And we picked up, the Japanese competition helped us, and now they're chasing us. American cars are great again.
Mr. Dornan, thank you. Karen Taylor is a former ASASU president. She is joining us tonight. She has a question for Mr. Forbes on property rights. Karen?
Mr. Forbes, last year the Supreme Court in the Sweet Home decision held that private property owners must set aside property for habitat for endangered species without compensation. Do you think this is fair? And moreover, what role do you think what burden do you think the government should bear in establishing endangered species habitat on private property?
Well, I believe in the Constitution, which simply says that if you're going to take somebody's property, you compensate them for it. You don't put on individual property owners the whole burden of the nation. It is morally wrong. It is constitutionally wrong. Just read the First Amendment. So concerning that habitat, if the local government thinks it's in the interest of the nation or the local area to have a habitat, they should fully compensate that property owner. Now, there's a takings clause in the Constitution, and the courts ought to start to pay attention to it again. Property rights are human rights. When the government can take from you without just compensation, they can take not only property, but your life and liberty as well. Keep that in mind.
Mr. Alexander, the topic is property rights.
Since I've been a chief executive of a state, let me give you one example of how to deal with that.
Please.
In Tennessee, we celebrate the great American outdoors, as I think we should do in our country. And the way we dealt with wetlands that we thought were important was in the 80s to set up a program of willing seller, willing buyer, and using common sense. We have begun to purchase wetlands, which we ought to protect, but we never did it from a seller who didn't want to sell, and we never did it without paying him a market value.
Thanks.
Since I did that as chief executive before,
Alexander.
that's the kind of policy
Time's
I would
up.
follow again.
Mr. Buchanan?
All right. Well, the problem comes from Washington, and that's why we got to add at least one new. We got to make one addition to the Endangered Species Act, and we're going to put Bruce Babbitt on it. Look, I agree we got to save the bald eagle, the timber wolf, the grizzly, and there's many, many endangered species we ought to protect. That's God's legacy to our country. But our problem is we got bureaucrats in Washington who are misusing this to put rats and insects and weeds ahead of families and workers and jobs.
Mr. Buchanan.
And that ends when we get there.
Mr. Dornan.
Pat's right. Pat's right. The problem is in Washington. I lived here for 6 months in '53, and then 6 months later going through jet fighter gunnery with 2 small children. I found a rattlesnake in our ground level housing at Willie Air Patch out here. I flew missions out to Gila Bend Gunnery Range, probably killed Gila monsters. I killed that rattlesnake. Coyotes killed 7 of my cats and 2 small dogs in the neighborhood. I got a Newfoundland, and I didn't have problems with the coyotes anymore. We've got to be reasonable. We can handle these problems in our 50 great states. And yes, get rid of Babbitt.
All right. Graham Lace is with us this evening. He's the Business College Council President. He has a question for Mr. Dornan on electability.
Yes, Mr. Dornan, as I'm sure one or two of you may have noticed, there's been quite a lot of mudslinging throughout this campaign. However, come this August, one of you is going to move on and challenge President Clinton for the White House. I'm just wondering if you can give me what is the one quality that you possess that none of these other candidates possess that distinguishes you from them and can lead you to a victory over President Clinton come this November.
I'm sorry, your first name?
Graham.
Graham?
Graham.
Graham, imagine Bob Dornan and Bill Clinton on the same stage. The Thriller from Manila. The truth is, I know so much more about him than any of these gentlemen or the ones that did not show up, that he would not face me. He would send my classmate, who is a friend, Al Gore, and that would be sad. But he would not face me. Now, electability, I represent a district that's 54% Hispanic, 10 or 11% Asian, 1% African American, not many Irishmen around Garden Grove and Santa Ana. I've held a Democrat seat through 9 tough elections and had to raise more money in $30 donations, Steve, than anybody who's ever served in the United States Congress. I am the most electable one here.
This is a quixotic crowd. Mr. Forbes, your comments, please.
I can beat President Clinton for a very simple reason. President Clinton is a man who has to get up each morning, read the polls to see what he's supposed to believe that day. There is no core to the man. I have a vibrant vision for the future. I've put specific proposals for getting America again on the table. I want to return opportunity, responsibility, power, control back to the American people.
Out of time,
that
Mr.
vision
Forbes.
is going to beat Bill Clinton, who has no real vision.
Mr. Alexander?
Well, Robert Novak says that I'm the one Republican that President Clinton himself does not want to run against. I believe that Steve Forbes could write a better column than President Clinton could. I believe Bob Dornan would just wipe him out in a radio debate. I think Pat Buchanan would beat him on Crossfire. But I've been a governor, a university president, a cabinet secretary, and we're electing a president. We're electing a real president, not a debater, not a columnist, not a chief legislator.
Mr. Alexander,
that's
out
what
of
the
time.
American people will be looking for.
Mr. Buchanan?
Lamar, we're not electing a resume. We are electing... You know how Bill Clinton says, "I feel your pain"? I will put him in the crossfire and make him feel the pain. And finally, vote for the candidate who has a vision of America, where we ought to go, an agenda for America, the capacity to communicate it, and who has the heart and soul that you need in a president of the United States.
Out of time, Mr. Buchanan. Thank you. Ben Driggs is the U of A student body president. Ben, hello. He has a question for Mr. Alexander on Social Security.
Yes, Mr. Alexander, I know this issue was just touched upon, but I'd like to know what reforms you would like to see in the Social Security system to ensure its viability for young Americans.
Thank you, Ben. I'll go back over the answer I gave, and I believe this is the right way to go about it. The next president, during his first 4 years, should wipe everything else off the table and lead the country through a discussion on 3 points. One, how can we make sure that everyone who is already paid in gets what they're entitled to? Number two, how can we take some of the good ideas that have been suggested to give younger people a chance to begin to use their own money to provide for their own savings and retirement? And three, how can we make sure that is solvent? It is time to do that in this country. The next president can do it. I will do it.
Thank you. Mr. Buchanan, please.
Well, I agree. There's really been a dereliction of duty on the part of members of Congress and the President. They've run away from this issue. Social Security is moving toward a collision with reality far down the road. Medicare is moving even sooner. I think what you need is a Republican President and Republican Congress, both houses, sit down in the White House, put something forward, and it's not going to be popular. Put it forward to the American people and say, here's how we believe this can best be resolved. And we stand behind it and take the hit and solve that in the first 6 months of the next administration.
Thank you. Mr. Dornan.
The issue is so difficult for elected politicians that we need a president who will be a hero and say, I'm going to do what's right for my country for 4 years. Like James K. Polk in your state, Lamar. Unlike Richard Nixon, who waited till he was elected a second time, and we lost 18,000 more young men in Vietnam before he unleashed the B-52s of the Strategic Air Command. We have to do it all in one term. And if he fixes it, because the money's a little bit's there for you, none for your children, he will be getting a second term by acclamation.
Mr. Forbes.
I'm very sad that Lamar Alexander and Pat Buchanan all talked about process. A real chief executive doesn't talk about process. He tells what he wants to do. The American people will figure out how he can do it. To answer the question, as I said before, we can devise a new system for younger Americans while keeping the promises to older Americans and to those who are going to retire in the next 15 years. My colleagues seem to think you have to cut back, reduce benefits. You don't. We have a unique opportunity to put in a new system for younger Americans. And when we do, it's going to create prosperity. If an American today making $10,000 a year, 20 years old, puts $1,200 in the savings account for 45 years, he will be a millionaire by age 65.
Time. Thank you. Lisa Higgins is the ASU West student body president. She has a question for Mr. Buchanan on welfare reform.
Good evening. The debate on welfare tends to focus on numbers and forget about human beings. Mr. Buchanan, please share with us your suggestions for welfare reform that focus on people.
All right. All right. Let me focus on people. The child that's in a welfare family is not responsible for the conditions of its birth or its conception. It is not accountable, responsible. It's done nothing wrong. We have to both concern ourselves with the well-being of that child. At the same time, we cannot reward antisocial behavior. You cannot set a young woman up in an apartment with welfare and food stamps and education funds and rent supplements. That's wrong. But these are my views. Let me suggest, though, you know, and you folks out there got as good as ideas as I do how to cure welfare, how to solve it. So what I would do is box up all the welfare programs at the federal level, send them back to Arizona, and you decide how best to solve this problem. You can do it. You know, I do not. Let me finish here. We have got to get back to the idea of states' rights, state responsibility. We are a self-governing people. We don't need Washington to tell you how to solve the welfare problem.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. Mr. Dornan.
On December 8th, Mother Teresa shook my hand. Somebody told her I was running for president, and she said, and when you are president, and I'll admit I was thinking 2001, she said, She said, a special love for the poor and the vulnerable. And this is not a shot at you, Steve, but you know better than anybody, no, it's not, that the rich do not need a president. Michael Eisner makes 200 times more a year than the president. The president is for the middle class who pays most of the bills and for the poor and vulnerable.
Time's up. Welfare reform, Mr. Forbes, focusing on people.
You have to recognize that the welfare system focusing on people destroys the very people it's supposed to help and save. It punishes you if you get married, punishes you if you work, punishes you if you save money. Every characteristic that will enable people to get back on their feet, this system undermines. So what we must do, we must return it. We must return the system to the states, municipalities, back to private charities. They will provide assistance for people who do get in trouble, but they'll do so in a way that will enable those people to get back on their feet and lead a productive life again.
Thank you, Mr. Ford. Mr. Alexander?
My walk across New Hampshire, I met a young couple in Nashua who had just been down to the welfare office in Portsmouth, where they told me they had been encouraged to separate in order to get higher welfare benefits. They were humiliated by that. What I would do is cancel Washington welfare and take the same amount of money and replace it with a neighborhood charity foundation that would embarrass us in this country that has 25% of all the money in the world to go to work in our own communities to help make sure that everyone in our hometown went to bed at night who needed help getting help. I would also create a tax credit so we could give money directly to those local charities.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Jane Witt is an ASU alumnus, and she has a question for Mr. Forbes on regulatory reform.
Yes.
Jane?
Thank you. Mr. Forbes, the government has assumed the role of protector by issuing complex regulatory compliance issues on small businesses, such as Truth in Savings, COBRA, ERISA, the EPA. Do you support simplification, and how would you assure that?
I'd absolutely support simplification. Our small businesses, especially today, spend too much time filling out government forms rather than growing their own businesses. Big companies in America can afford those regulations. They've got the bureaucracies to do it. They are a crushing burden. There's no reason why, for example, there is bureaucratic excess, regulatory excess. Just one example, if you have a rainstorm, you don't get many in Arizona, but if you get a rainstorm in my part of the world, New Jersey or in Florida, your front lawn qualifies as a wetland, and the Army Corps of Engineers and the EPA will be on your backs. That is wrong. Congress had a deregulatory bill this year. It didn't pass, thanks to some leadership or lack of it in the Senate. There will be genuine deregulation, and we're going to start with the tax code. We're going to also get with regulations, take the burden off the American people, and the American people will move ahead. That's been our past. It can be our future.
Mr. Alexander, regulatory reform?
I understand the question a little better because I've helped to start a company that has 2,800 employees. Here's what I would do. I would ask the Congress every other year to spend its time not just on changing regulations, but changing laws. The laws are the problem. Sunset the laws and the regulations, start over again, use common sense regulations, put people in the Congress who have their feet in the real world, cut the pay of Congress, send them home so you have teachers, business people, ranchers, and farmers from the real world in the citizen Congress.
Mr. Buchanan.
You know, Steve's comment reminded me I was in Iowa, and a farmer had let drain-off water pile up in a big ditch in a gully there, and some of these stalks grew up that indicated that ducks or geese could come in there. And they declared the whole area, a protected wetland, 7 acres around the thing. It was a giant mud puddle, and they declared it a protected wetland and seized this fellow's property without any compensation. I went out and looked at that mud puddle, and I can tell you there is not a goose between here and Canada who would drop into that thing. And it is an absurdity what these fellows are doing.
Mr. Buchanan, out of time. Mr. Dornan, please.
I've never met anybody in this nation ever that has said to me, Congressman, I love dirty water and filthy air. I just love it. We are fighting hard in the Congress, and a lot of my worthy colleagues here, men of integrity all, do not recall that on November the 8th, 1994, people in this auditorium were elected in an outstanding freshman class. I got reelected, and we're trying to roll back regulatory reform, but when the media, particularly on Manhattan, beats the hell out of us and acts like we hate children and want filthy air and water, then it's a tough job where the rubber meets the road.
Sam Lavis has joined us. He is the NAU student body president. He has few NAU alumni here tonight, I can sense that. Sam has a question for Mr. Dornan on foreign policy.
Mr. Dornan, what do you think the criteria should be for countries seeking foreign aid from the U.S.?
Well, there was a presidential candidate once who said something very understandably logical, like, you treat your friends better than your enemies. I believe in foreign aid, and I've been cutting back on it and back on it to accommodate that logic. You treat your friends. I love big Air Force C-5s going into Rwanda, and I've been there and been in Ethiopia and Somalia. You're looking at the last man out of Somalia, where Clinton got 19 heroes killed. I want to help the world. We have to help where we can. We're the world's greatest last best hope, as Lincoln said, and the world's only superpower. There is a role for us.
Mr. Forbes, foreign policy, foreign aid.
In foreign aid, it depends on the circumstances. Too often in foreign aid, the money's simply gone to support bureaucracies in other countries and to subsidize Swiss banks. I do believe in foreign aid in an area like Israel and Egypt to help the peace process. I do believe in emergency aid. But another area that we need to cut it back is with the International Monetary Fund, which is guilty of economic malpractice, destroys countries that try to get better. You saw it in the past. I would defund the IMF if I couldn't reform it. That would save billions.
Mr. Alexander, your thoughts on foreign aid?
Number one, I would move the foreign aid that really is our national security aid, such as the Nunn-Lugar bill with nuclear weapons, or with the Middle East. I'd move it to the Defense Department, put it there. That's defense, not really foreign aid. Second, our best foreign aid is when we export our ideas and our principles, not when we give away money to friends who then bite our hands later.
Mr. Buchanan?
Well, I supported foreign aid during the Cold War when I served for 8 years under 3 American presidents. But look, the Cold War is over. Countries around the world are moving into a brand new era, stealing our markets, and I believe this. The American people should not be forced to send tax dollars abroad to balance the budgets of foreign governments when we can't balance the budget of our own government in Washington, D.C. So I would end foreign aid.
Thank you, Mr. Buchanan. Don Ascoli is an ASU alumnus, and he has a question for Mr. Alexander on the Grand Canyon.
Mr. Alexander, last November, Bill Clinton shut down the federal government by presidential veto. Many Arizonans supported our governor, Fife Symington, in trying to keep the Grand Canyon open. This is a national treasure that's been open for thousands of years until Clinton became president. What is your position in working with the states to help operate and manage federal properties, federal landmarks, and federal grazing lands?
Number one, the Grand Canyon would never have been closed if I had been president, because I would have signed the House Republican budget and balanced the budget. Number two, I've floated the Grand Canyon. Number three, what I would try to do is to give more of our treasured properties a chance to be managed and influenced by local decision making. I live at the edge of the Great Smoky Mountain National Park. We treasure it about as much as you treasure the Grand Canyons. We believe that we can make good decisions about the management and the attitude and the values of that park, and that we ought to have more say about how the park is managed, when it's open, and if we, by our volunteer efforts, could, as you tried to do, keep the Grand Canyon open, we should do that.
Mr. Buchanan?
All right, look, I believe when I was up in Alaska, I told them the people best positioned to preserve the natural beauty of a land like Arizona and to rightly utilize the resources are the people who live there and raise their children there. So what I would do is this. I would set aside your national parks, your national monuments, your national forests, and the rest of the land controlled by the federal government. I would give back to the states and Arizona to decide how to use your land yourselves.
Mr. Dornan.
I have a nephew who doesn't care about becoming rich. He wants to spend his whole life as a federal national park ranger. This is such a great country, so beautiful. And that Grand Canyon, one of the few things in the world that surpasses any photograph, any description. You have to see it to believe it. I think that it took a Sun Devil alumnus to put it right. They can't get this right on the networks, that it was Clinton who shut down the government, not my party or JD.
Mr. Forbes.
I think the Grand Canyon is a fitting symbol of the Great Hole in Washington today. There's nothing there. And it's a hole without the beauty of the Grand Canyon. Clearly, when the government shut down, Arizona should have been able to open the Grand Canyon. But this leads to a very larger question, and that is land management by the government. I think the government owns too much land in America, too many resources. Again, return it to the people, return it to the states. You'll do a good job with it. I trust you more than I do the federal government.
Thank you. James Gregory is the NAU Yuma student body president. He has a question for Mr. Buchanan on immigration. James?
Mr. Buchanan, I think you already covered the immigration topic, so I'll ask you a question that's pertinent to university students. What role do you feel the federal government should play in providing financial aid for college students? And do you support the current federal financial aid programs?
All right. I support the Republican Party reforms of the student loan program. I believe in student loans. I believe in providing opportunity for kids who have worked hard and who will otherwise not have an opportunity to go to college. And I also believe in student loans being paid back. Now, and I think I believe that is a federal responsibility, because you might get a loan here and you might want to go to Princeton and you go all over the nation. But the rest of the Department of Education that my friend Lamar helped build is in trouble, Lamar. And I'll tell you why. Because when I get there, I've seen what they've done. Primary and secondary education are responsibilities of the people at the local and state level, and parents in particular. So we will end Goals 2000. I will end outcome-based education. We will shut down the U.S. Department of Education.
Mr. Alexander, I think the question was on student aid.
It was. I'm a very strong supporter of federal grants and loans for college students, and as Education Secretary, recommended significant increases, not just for young people, but because when you go to commencements today, what you hear from the audience is, way to go, Mom. It's Mom going back to school to get a degree. One of the most important things we need to do in job growth is not build a wall around the country, but to focus on education so that we grow jobs, and so we make it easier for men and women who are changing jobs or losing jobs to go from one to the next. The best way to do that is the federal college grant and loan program.
Out of time. Mr. Dornan, your comments On student aid.
The hardest question you can get on a college campus, because it involves self-interest, not always enlightened self-interest, is this one. There is a national security aspect to loans to college students. Physics, chemistry, advanced math, advanced engineering. But when it comes to theater arts, Carl Malden told me in the state next door, New Mexico, that he taught at their theater arts department there, and for 40 years before that, not a single person ever made $1 in show business. There are majors where you have to suffer. It's not one broad sweep.
Mr. Forbes.
Thank you. Calm down. You're eating into my time.
Mr. Forbes, please.
I do believe.
Please.
I do believe.
Teach a class for free.
Please.
Student loans and grants are legitimate. The real problem is that too many of our universities and colleges are not controlling their expenses. It's going to take a real CEO to do that. Too often, they simply get the money, build up bureaucracies, build up administrative costs. And if you want to be unpopular, just ask this question: how many hours a week do the professors now spend in the classroom teaching undergraduates?
Hillary Sadler has a question on affirmative action for Steve Forbes, and we're almost out of time, so we're just going to have to limit it to Mr. Forbes' response.
Good evening.
Please, quickly.
A few states have started to constructively and expressively eliminate affirmative action programs. So as a graduating law student, I was wondering, what proposals do you suggest or do you have to make affirmative action more effective?
I believe that in America, you should be judged as an individual, not as a member of a group. Quotas are not right, they're wrong. But that does mean that as president, we must work together to make the word responsibility an opportunity, especially the word opportunity, not a word of rhetoric, but a word of reality. That means reforming the tax code, that means enterprise zones in the inner cities, parental control, a Homestead Act for the inner cities, so that all Americans have a chance to get ahead. That's the American way.
Out of time. Thank you, Mr. Forbes. Our thanks to the students for their questions and the alumni for the closing statements. We will feature the candidates in reverse alphabetical order. And Mr. Forbes, that means you go first.
Thank you. In this election year, we can create a mandate to make America once again that shining city on the hill. All of the proposals that I've been making in this campaign have been expressly designed to give opportunity and responsibility, power and control back to the American people. This gets to the heart of the American experiment, which is simply this: that seemingly ordinary people can achieve extraordinary deeds when allowed and encouraged to take responsibility for themselves, for their families, and for their communities. That is the American way. With a flat tax that's a tax cut, you'll not only earn more, you'll keep more as well. With school choice, you will control your children's education. With medical savings accounts, those of you on Medicare will have more choice, more control, at less cost, and better coverage as well. With term limits, politicians will once again be genuine public servants rather than aloof masters. In America, we can restore the American dream. Working together, we can rebuild America's moral foundations. We can revive the American economy. And the American dream simply means this: that each of us, all of us, have a chance to discover and develop to the fullest our God-given talents. We are a moral nation. We have a higher purpose in this world. We should recognize that. If we make these changes, America will move ahead, and we will be that great nation again. Thank you very much.
Mr. Forbes. Mr. Dornan, your closing statement, please. Mr. Dornan.
Thank you, sir, and thank you, Sun Devils, and all the other presidents and chairmen. Mr. Chairman, I brought a message to this campaign all year long. Started on the House floor February 7th. It's on every Dornan sign and bumper sticker and button. Faith, family, and freedom. And all my colleagues have paid me the compliment of adopting it. Christian Coalition has recently adopted it. So is Phyllis Schlafly's Eagles. Faith, family, and freedom. That says it all. It should be the motto of the Republican Party, along with that Reagan message that I've always said meant growth, opportunity, and productivity, GOP, years before I knew Steve was even a Republican. What a great country. What a great country. I knew his dad was a good Republican, don't take that wrong. What a great country we live in. And I will give you the motto for how we will solve the moral crisis in the White House.
Thank you,
Our team beats Bill's team. Name the front four cabinet and the vice president in April.
Mr. Buchanan, your closing comments, please. We're running short on time.
I would hope the good people of Arizona on this coming Tuesday, where they're going to go a long way toward choosing the presidential nominee, will at least vote no to negative attack ads and this kind of negative campaigning that has taken place in our primaries. But I want them to vote for something. I want you to vote for an individual or the individual you believe has a vision for America, who has an agenda for the American people, who will go to Washington as president and represent those who have no voice in Washington, those who are unrepresented in that culture in Washington, those who are not heard. And I've mentioned the unborn. They're not heard. I've mentioned the American workers whose jobs are being lost. I speak for the middle-class Americans burdened down by taxation, regulation, who really get no hearing in D.C. We know who gets a hearing in there. You can go up there and see them all over Congress, the lobbyists and the others. Vote for a president of the United States who will go there and who will represent the core and heart and soul of the American people. Thank you very much.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you very much.
Mr. Alexander.
Thank you very much. On Tuesday, Arizonans will help to elect the first president of the next century, to nominate someone who can paint a picture of our future that is brighter and more compelling than the picture that Bill Clinton paints based upon whatever he woke up believing on that day. The picture that I have of our future is one of a strong defense and a balanced budget, of more good new jobs than we lose, of replacing Washington welfare with neighborhood charity, of a GI Bill for kids to help parents take back their schools, of a citizen Congress. I hope you will look at each of us and see in which of us you see a president, someone with a real-world background, with a chief executive's experience. I would like to lead us into Washington expecting less from Washington and more from ourselves. That is what created in America the greatest country in the world, and that is what will do it again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Alexander. We would like to thank all of the candidates for their participation tonight. Our thanks to the students and alumni. I think our thanks to the audience. Thank you very much for joining us as well. Don't forget to vote on Tuesday. I'm Michael Grant. Good night.
Here's a look at the Republican presidential candidate schedules for tomorrow. Lamar Alexander will be campaigning in Houston. Pat Buchanan continues his 5-day tour throughout Arizona. That state's primary is Tuesday.